Hi, everyone. Welcome to Fin Factor. I'm your host, Blaine Birch, co-founder and CEO at Dry Run Cash Flow Forecasting Software. And I'm really excited today to have Wesley Hartman, founder of Automata Practice Development, joining me today because Wesley and I, we met at an online event a couple of weeks ago. We met and talked a little bit about what you do, which I find really interesting because it's implementing automation, especially into CPA firms. And it's such an interesting area that had to have you on the show. Thanks, Wesley, for joining me.
Hey, the proverbial podcast, I'm happy to be here.
Love to hear it, especially for a first thing Monday morning. So yeah, tell me a little bit about because I know we talked about it, but I'm not even going to try and attempt to introduce what you do. But I find it really fascinating. So give me a sort of the Coles Notes version of what you do for especially for CPA firms.
So what we are is we are a managed automation service provider, like if we had to kind of do it in one phrase. But the long version of that is that what we do is we build automations that are specific for accounting firms, tax, audit, cash, and kind of bookkeeping, the whole accounting section. And so we do everything. We are software developers. We do everything in Python. My direct background is I have 15 years as the director of technology for an accounting firm, a tax firm. So I've been through 15 tax seasons in the US. So I know front to back the operations. I don't do my own taxes, but I know the process and operations behind it. A little bit about my background. I also have a degree in computer engineering. Me and a bunch of student engineers, we built a self-driving, about the size of a golf cart, but it drove itself as a college project. And then from there went into IT, accounting 15 years, like I mentioned. While I was there, I wrote a bunch of automations. And then about December of last year, I quit that, started up a business. And my goal is to try to increase capacity for accounting firms using automation, because for every hour an automation saves is also an hour of capacity that you can reallocate to something that is more value driven for your clients.
Yeah, and we're of course seeing that like even where we come from on the cash flow side, that's one of the big, I guess, appeals that we see all the time is we save them hours a week, but then that's time they're spending talking with their customers or talking with their clients, and sometimes bringing more clients on because they have that capacity to do that and to really offer a lot of value. What areas do you see are some of the most common or kind of low-hanging fruit that a lot of CPA firms are struggling with that could actually be automated to help do that lift?
I'd say probably a lot of operational work, essentially, right? So let's start at the beginning. Let's talk about the pipeline, the client onboarding pipeline, right? So you get someone who maybe signs up on your website, say, hey, reach out to me, here's some information, that sort of thing, right? So someone gets that web form via email, enters it into your CRM system, and then someone like a partner reviews it to see like, okay, are they, for lack of a better word, are they a good fit? And then you have a phone call. Maybe that phone call, it works out, maybe it doesn't. And then you move them from your pre-pipeline to your pipeline, and then you follow up with them, like all these. So there's a lot of operational pieces. And if you just think about a prospect in general, I'm just going to make an assumption. I would say you only capture 50% of your prospects, right? And the other 50 fall out for whatever reason. That's 50% of your sales pipeline work that essentially is wasted, right? Like it's not driving any value. It's not giving you value. It's not giving your prospect necessarily value or anything like that. So like parts of that can be automated. We go a little further. I'm going to talk a bit more about like on the tax side of things, right? So every accounting firm, at least U.S. based tax. I know in Canada also they have their own taxes as well, but in the U.S., since that's where I'm very heavily experienced in delivering tax returns, waiting for a client to sign their documents and send it back in, et cetera, like parts of that process can be automated when it's really just dragging a PDF from one system to another, moving a workflow from like an accepted step to a ready to e-file step, something along those lines, like those sorts of automations, right? Or maybe even the final steps of automation where they're like, okay, the project's done, maybe an automatic roll forward of the work, stuff like that. There's also various other parts within the process that can be automated, such as just hunting down documents. Now, while I am an automation service provider, where we build custom automations, I always try to tell clients, look at your current software packages for automation tools. I don't think, like, again, we're software developers. We build everything in the Python programming language. We can do some really complicated things and really cool things. But if it's just a matter of we just need to send a email reminder to our clients to do something, and your software can do that, that's what you should be using, not necessarily an automation provider, right? That sort of thing.
So, and I imagine any sort of CPA firm, especially as they grow, they probably initially with a lot of these things go, oh, it doesn't take that long. But then it's like, doesn't take that long, doesn't take that long, doesn't take that long. And they start adding up. And then by the end of the week, it's like, well, we lost hours. And then I imagine as the firm gets larger, they're serving more clients. Now you're getting into some pretty substantial dollars every month and every year. So what size of firm do you find tends to be where they come, they go, yeah, we're really recognizing that we're burning through time here that we shouldn't be.
Yeah. So I'd say, so I wouldn't say it's necessarily a revenue, like amount of revenue that's bringing. I tend to think of it more as a size of the firm as far as number of people,
Yeah.
right? Because that's with automations, yes, there's a return on investment as far as dollar amounts, but I like to also think that there's a return on investment as far as, full-time employees, essentially, right? Like how many hours are you recapturing that you can reallocate? So I tend to find that usually at about 20 users and up is where someone like my business would come in, where, for lack of a better word, the firm can just kind of throw money at the problem to kind of automate that piece of it or multiple pieces of their process. However, I've had some smaller firms, they actually come to me and we do an engagement for a little while because they have a pretty good idea of how they want to build their firm from, from sole proprietor to small to mid to even like starting to tap into large. And, they have enough like full foresight across the entire lifetime that they know how to set things up at the beginning, at which point they're like, well, we want to apply automation at the beginning of our growth so that we don't have to worry about it further down the line,
Mhm.
essentially. So it's kind of a balance as far as which one. I have sometimes small firms, they'll automate a few things and then they'll stop automating for a little while until they grow a little more and they build out their processes. And then after that, they're like, all right, we've built out our processes to be standardized. Standardization is great for automating. And then they're like, all right, let's go back to the automation piece and start automating these processes so we can continue to grow.
Yeah, yeah. And so do you often find like, regardless of the size of the firm, do they tend to come in going, okay, I've got this pain point, I know exactly what it is, or they start to kind of learn about you guys and go, you know what? We probably have a bunch of things that we should look at. Let's find one to start with.
So a lot of times when I talk to someone, they only know they have pain. They don't know what the pain point is yet, right? Like, or they maybe know the pain point in the middle of tax season or the middle of the busy time at the like month end close. And they're like, there's got to be a better way. But then they're so inundated with other work that they're just like, well, I'll deal with it later. I just got to get the work done. And then when it's no longer painful, they kind of forget what the pain point was, essentially, right? So I've seen that. I have seen people come in with one specific pain point and they're like, hey, we know this is the one thing we want to fix, essentially, right? And usually when I talk to them, we find other points of automation, essentially, right? Like it's like we start
Yeah.
with one pain point and like, okay, but because I have the experience in the industry, I can ask, well, what about this? How do you deal with this problem? And they're like, oh, well, we deal with it like this. And I say, well, you can automate that. And they're like, wait, you can? I'm like, yeah, you just got to adjust your processes a little bit. Usually, we try to have as much um, impact without having much disruption. That's one of our goals. So frequently what we do is we will work with our clients and we try to determine, okay, this is your one pain point, but let's look at your entire process. Let's find multiple pain points. Let's try to save a number of hours, not just solve one problem, because that one problem might be a problem right now. And again, sometimes that problem is the problem of October 1st, but then right after October 16th, the thought is like, oh, okay, it wasn't that bad, right? But then you ask them again, October 1st or April 1st, same problem. Like they're feeling the same pain point, right? So sometimes they come in, sometimes they might have one pain point, and then I explain, well, okay, this is how, as a managed service provider, this is what we do. And then they're like, okay, well, maybe why don't we come up with some other ideas first? And we actually provide on our website, we have what we call an automation impact worksheet. And from there, it's a simple Excel. I know accountants love Excel. And what you do is you put your ideas, and then you can score your ideas by different metrics, right? So we usually say like, okay, how many staff are involved? Is it like 5 staff that are doing this one huge project per year? Well, if we automate that whole process, that 5 staff can do something else. Stability of the task, like, does it never change, et cetera. So there's like 7 or 8 points, and then you score it, and then that tells you, one, what is going to be the most impactful automation on your firm, but two, it also lets you start building up your ideas, because once the idea train starts flowing, people just like, oh, and I can automate this, and I can do this, and my staff don't have to do this thing anymore. And in the end, right, you're also, while I say you're getting capacity, in many ways you're also helping your bottom line, because a lot of times maybe you're paying less overtime, right? Maybe you're billing your clients,
Yeah.
you're having a higher realization on your clients, etc.
So I imagine one of the challenges then too is, especially with the larger team, is actually rolling this out and getting buy-in and getting everybody trained up and everything. But so I imagine that would be a bit of an issue. How do you like some of the things you do to approach that and make sure that it actually is a smooth rollout?
So interestingly, automation, a lot of times the rollout's pretty smooth, but usually it's because we just tell a staff member, you don't have to do this thing anymore. Like,
Yeah, it's nice.
like
That's pretty slick. Yeah.
there's, a good example. So a very popular product in the US called SafeSend is used for electronic signature for tax returns. They have the ability to, they have APIs that are exposed. So what we do is whenever a signature is triggered on their system, we automatically move the document from that system over to whatever document manager our client is using, right? So normally that's a manual process, or maybe it's Practice Ignition or whatever signature platform.
Mm.
And all we do is we just tell the staff, okay, we built the automation. We'll monitor the logs if something crops up for whatever reason, maybe a weird client number or something like that. But generally speaking, we say, you just don't have to do that thing anymore. Our automations are handling it. And most of the time, I mean, sometimes the joke is that, like, I've had an admin say like, oh, wow, I'm not going to have a job anymore, right? But the reality is, and this is for across the board, is that um, I don't think, I think, and I've also tend to see most firms are just because we automate something, most firms are not going to be like, great, we can get rid of staff. No, most firms basically say, great, staff that are doing something that's not really being valuable, or generating value for the business. Now we can maybe have them do some basic data entry, right? Or maybe chasing clients. I mean, chasing clients, unfortunately, aside from an automated email reminder, is still not a very automated process, right? Because clients ignore notifications, just like I'll admit I ignore notifications too from emails and stuff like that, right? It's very easy to. So generally speaking, I think rollouts tend to be pretty good. Sometimes a little bumpy, right? Because like any implementation of a new system, right? Like I mentioned, maybe a weird character and a client number comes across that we didn't anticipate, right? Or I had one situation where we have an automation that automatically takes files from one portal system and puts in a document manager, and the file started with an underscore, like the file name, and that threw the bot off a little bit because the way the portal handled it
Yeah.
was a little different, right? So yeah, it's but usually most people are pretty happy to let automation take over little bits of their job that they don't really want to do anyways.
Yeah. Yeah. I just off topic a little bit here, but it reminds me of a time we actually had a file that it took a long time to open. Just the dry run file took a long time to open. The client says, "Yeah, I don't know what's going on. It's like taking a really long time." And so we dug into it and found out they had a single transaction that was misdated, but it was misdated by like like 1,000 years. It was like the year that 1,000 or something like that. And so what happened is like that's literally the first transaction in the forecast, and then it does 1,000 year calculation, and so it took a while. Anyway, once we found that, we're like, what on earth? But then, of course, then you add in the safety net, basically. But it's
Yeah,
like you can't predict that kind of stuff to start with. Um,
absolutely.
I wanted to ask you a little bit because I just sort of going just off topic a little bit here, like because I
Mhm.
know tax season is a big deal, right? Like that is when so much happens in a CPA firm. Um, and I'm wondering, like, how do you guys sort of deal with some of that seasonality for yourself? But then also, how, like, what do you find is a really good time for CPAs to engage, roll things out, and get it done so that it's not like landing right in the middle of tax season.
Yeah. So as far as my business goes, one thing that's a little different as far as maybe other providers and all that. So because we're a managed automation service provider, we actually do things on a monthly charge, right? So what we do is we charge our clients monthly. We have libraries of code that are all pre-built essentially. I mean, in some ways you could say it's like Zapier, except everything we custom built in Python, right? Like I mentioned. But what it does allow us to do is that we kind of spread the cost across the entire year essentially.
Mhm.
Um, and then from there, what we try to do is when we're working with our clients, we're trying to be like, hey, give us a list of projects, right? We try to work with them to create an inventory project so that no matter what throughout the year, we're working on something for our clients. In addition, we always meet with our clients, with our managed service clients every other week, essentially, to try to give them updates, kind of keep them in the loop, really have that touch, because even though we're an automation shop, there's a big human factor to it, right? But as far as the best time, I think for accounting firms, like again, with tax season, there's that seasonality, right? You know, more if you're maybe a bookkeeping business, cash advisory, that sort of thing, you're a little closer to month, and your tax season is not as brutal as if you are a pure tax, or maybe you're a big audit, you have your audit season. I've even been at a firm that is they're litigators. That's it. They don't even do their own taxes, but they litigate tax law and stuff like that, right? So their seasonality is all over the place. But if we're looking at, on the tax side of things, I actually try to tell people to implement stuff during the summer, not the winter.
Mhm.
And the feeling a lot of times is, well, like the best time to do it is during the winters because that's when everything kind of resets, right? But I'd like to state instead the best time to do is during the summer is because you have a lot of existing data and it's easier to transition. Let's just take like a practice management software, right? So you're trying to use a new software. Your software is at like your tax returns are at different phases, right? Prep, review, waiting for client
Mhm.
information, stuff like that. Um, but during the summer, you have data from your clients already. You're still kind of getting a slow trickle inflow of whether it's, you know, PDFs coming in or K1s and whatnot. And so it lets you kind of touch your new software without the stress of, all right, it's January 1st, tax season is about to start. We're going to get a huge rush of data from our clients that want to try to file immediately. We're under the gun versus during summer. Yeah, you kind of can be under the gun for October 15th, September and October 15th, but you have something existing to work with. Like especially if you're thinking about switching tax software, like from a Lacert to UltraTax to Pro, or Pro to Lacert, or whatever you're changing. It's a lot easier to be able to like take a, for lack of a better word, a partially finished return and look at a partially finished return in your new tax software and kind of compare like where the inputs are going, how to do the calculations, stuff like that. So from a tax, like a tax accounting firm style thing, I'm always a big proponent of new software in the summer and then like tweaks and adjustments to procedures in the winter for the upcoming tax season, essentially, right?
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
no, that makes a lot of sense. I'm curious with the firms that tend to come to you, are they like have they gone through sort of the sort of tech stack modernization generally already? Are they a little bit like early adopter-ish or a bit more forward sort of thinking on the tech side? Or are some of them coming in and it's like, yeah, no, we've been running this for the last 15 years. We just want to automate a little bit of this.
So it's a spread, like so many things, right? It's a spread. So the what I would say is that I've had firms come to me where I've actually told them I can't help them. And that is because their stuff is in such a walled garden, so to speak, usually because of maybe the platforms that they're hosting on, the softwares. I mean, usually a great example is that if they're using desktop software, right? So let's say your UltraTax, your Practice CS, your Engagement CS, UltraTax, or your Lacert, stuff like that, but you're running it in a remote web service, not a remote web service, like a remote desktop environment that the server, the company that's hosting those environments have 100% control, right? So yes, you reduce all your IT costs essentially because now instead of having physical servers in a closet somewhere, now you're having them, hosted and someone else is handling it all for you. The problem is that also from a security standpoint, rightfully, they have all the control, which means any kind of automation that you want to run, you have to one go through all the hoops, and then two, they might not even allow it. They're just like, nope, too dangerous. We don't like the idea of it. Whatever, it's not a Microsoft product or something like that.
Right.
So, but usually those are, I don't see those too often as much anymore. A lot of times, I'm working with firms, either they've just made the shift to a cloud environment, and they're like, all right, now we're 100% in the cloud. What can we do? Um, or they're about to make that shift, like they're saying like, okay, we're getting rid of file cabinet CS, and we're in the middle of migration to GFR. Let's see if there's some other cool ideas that we can kind of package in with it to simplify our lives. And then
Mhm.
we do get some people who are very, you could say, early adopters, tech forward, right? They've been in the cloud for a while, where they set up their firm, especially like I'd say younger firms, maybe only a couple years old, where they set up their firm in the cloud 100%. And the only software they have is maybe their tax software, and that's because a lot of tax software is still desktop based. Um, where you have to have a computer running, the CCH access software client. All the data is sitting in the cloud, but you still run a piece of software on your computer that downloads all the data, does all the calculations locally, and when you save it, just uploads it to the cloud. It's not like a true SaaS-based product in a browser, that sort of
Yeah,
thing.
yeah, and it like of course, I'm sure in your world, same with our world, SaaS feels like it's been around forever, and we've all been using it forever. And but the reality is, like for a large part of the business world, it's kind of last, I don't know, like 10, 15 years, if that, when it's really started to show up. And we see it quite commonly. The more sort of complicated the business is, and the more parts they have plugged into each other and everything. It's a much more difficult transition to move to the cloud. But I think there's just that tipping point, and I can see automation being one of the big pushes. Is that it's just like we got to do it. And then you kind of see that carrot at the end where it's like, you know what, it could make a really big difference. It feels less like we're changing for the sake of change and more
Yeah.
for we're taking some really big steps forward with the business.
Yeah, and I think along those are kind of getting squeezed at both ends, essentially, right? So, um, I'd say like newer firms, right? When they're starting up, they're kind of focusing 100% in the cloud, right? Like they're like, I want to be able to work from anywhere. I don't want to have to install anything. I don't want to have to remote into anything. I want to be able to just log into whatever I need to log into, have user controls, so I can also utilize staff all over the world that
Yeah.
I can easily like segment data, for various regulatory purposes. Um, but what I tend to think is that it's a lot of, I guess the term that's floating around is like legacy firms or whatever you want to call it, but firms that were, I want to say like pre 2000, that sort of thing, because, or pre even 2010s, right? Because pre 2010s, that's all about you have a server in your back office. Everyone comes physically into the office. If you have some remote workers, and maybe when you migrated your servers to the cloud, but they're still kind of traditional servers, that sort of thing. So I think those are the firms where for them it's very difficult to change because it's also very expensive. If you're like
Yeah.
let's say you're an 80 person firm, but you've been around since the 60s, right? Like, so you buy a set of servers, those servers have 7 to 10 years of life in them. And then when you make that transition over to a new server, like it's, what do we do? Do we spend, however many tens of $1,000s on a new server? Or do we spend more money and transition into a completely different SaaS product, but we lose out efficiency, right? Like we're losing. So it's a tough calculation, right? On top of that, you throw in on top of that the automation, like when you're on these old style servers, right? And all that stuff, the CPA pipeline, the accounting pipeline, everyone's talking about it. There's not enough people going into the industry. One of the parts of the solution is automation. But if you're like, well, but we have our processes. I mean, we're drowning in our processes, but we have our process and change is too painful. But that carrot, like you said, where like, but if we do make that change and we can get these automations in place, we can get relief in other areas, especially the fact that we can't find the talent that we need. So
Yeah.
the relief really, like I said, it's kind of being squeezed from both sides, right? So let's get that
That's a
relief.
really interesting sort of area that I hadn't really considered, but the moving to the cloud and having automation and a lot of this, I guess I don't want to say cutting edge, but just more modernized technology would actually have a really big impact on attracting talent. And it's a real challenge to attract talent. But I suspect it also flows downhill to attracting customers, because if the customers are talking with your firm about your services, they're probably talking with a few others at the same time. And if I'm sure it's a competitive advantage of, yeah, Sunday night 3 a.m. you want to log in because you need to see X, Y, or Z, you can, is probably more appealing than email us, we'll get you a report a week
Yeah.
down the road or whatever. So I think there's probably, and I imagine all of this has been accelerated with suddenly a huge part of this staff were working at home exclusively for a few years, and now they're probably drawing people back to the office. But um, there's got to be an attractiveness for some of that staff and even new staff to just be able to say, "Why I want to be able to work from where I want to work and have systems that are modern, like you said. I can log in from anywhere and I can get my work done." Um, so it's amazing how I think the tech stack and the automation goes further than just efficiencies. It's actually attracting staff and attracting clients.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. So we talk about, automation, but automation can also give can give the appearance of like being more advanced in your technology and that sort of thing. So like a great example, I think, is that there are still accounting firms that either will physically mail a paper organizer, or maybe, they're at least emailing their organizer. When at this point, and don't get me wrong, will always be clients who want that, right? They want that physical sheet of paper, and you can't, sometimes you can cut out some clients that are like that, and maybe it's a math thing, like, we're spending a lot of time, but we're not getting, it's not a good realization, it's not a good fit. So maybe you're like,
Yeah.
okay, go fine. Sorry, we can't service you anymore. But other times it's like, oh no, we do want to keep that client's a good fit. So those are exceptions. But I think, when I was at my old firm, one client had, we onboarded a client, and the client, we were still kind of sending out PDF organizers at least, right? But they were PDFs, they were not fillable, like they were static documents and all that stuff. And we just brought on this client, and the client emailed back and said, "So is this what I'm expecting?" Kind of thing, like that. At which point, and it was a new, very big client. So, and that was actually interesting. That was the biggest push into using more of a digital organizer, like as opposed to a PDF. And it's interesting that it was client driven. It wasn't, they didn't really want to do it because it was a change in process. We've been doing it the same way for however long. But suddenly, like, oh, a client asks for it. Oh, now we got to do something, right? So we immediately went into like beta testing essentially a digital organizer with them and a few other clients that tend to be a little more tech forward. And then the next tax season at the beginning, we were all on digital organizers and only sending out PDFs or even a couple papers still for those clients that specifically say, I don't want to do any portal or anything like that, which is also valid. Like portals, how many portals does your firm need, right? For clients to log into things. But at the same time, that was very client driven. At the same time, having staff driven change, again, tax, on the tax side of things, but how many W-2s does a first year accountant need to enter before they understand how to enter a W-2? Right. K1's much more complex, right? And even there are certain nuances of W-2, but generally speaking, right, box one goes into box one. Um, so that's not really exciting, I think, for, newer staff coming in. They do want to be challenged, and data entry is not a challenging endeavor, usually. So I think implementing any forms of automation that allow your younger staff to be like, hey, use AI tools, like especially with some of the younger staff coming in, like, hey, like help us understand how you used AI in college, because I guarantee you every college student that graduated this summer used AI in some form or another, right? And probably way more than anybody used. I mean, it sounds silly, but when I graduated, Google and search engines were just kind of becoming a thing. And me and my friends joke, but Googling is a skill, right? It's not it's not just something you do, it's a skill. So I think both ends, technology driven from your clients, technology driven from new staff coming in. I think it's going to push a lot of things in the industry forward, essentially.
Well, and I think you bring up a really good point too, that it's easy for, a business owner or a firm owner to think, well, we're not that far behind, or our accounting software isn't much different than the cloud, or it can do the same thing or whatever. What I think oftentimes they miss is that you're not just compared apples to apples. You're compared to technology moving forward everywhere. So just like you said, yeah, as students, they may use chat GPT in college. You may not use that in your job necessarily, but it's sort of an equivalency. Like they're like that. Well, I use this over here. Yeah, I want it over here. I could search this website. I want to be able to search that website. I could access, and I could pay my bills online over here. Well, now I have the expectation I can pay my bills for everybody online. Like, yeah, so the expectations of what the staff and what the clients are expecting from you isn't just from talking even with other accounting firms. It's like their everyday life. When things just get easier, they expect you to do the same thing, and so that it sort of compounds pressure on these firms as well to make sure they're kind of ahead of the game, because it's a competitive world out there, right?
Yeah, I mean, a big role at my old firm was I kind of called myself a mad engineer, but I was always experimenting, right? Like, what can we do to make things better at the firm? And it was funny. Someone asked me, like it was a senior manager asked me, like, can we go 1 year without changing something? And I said, yeah, we can when technology stops moving forward, right? Like, but the reality is that yeah, there are certain things that don't change. Like your tax software, you tend to stick with for quite a while, or certain things. But we always have to be exploring, what new value can be generated both for the business and for the clients and for the staff, that sort of thing. We can't, it's really the worst thing that can happen is, as a business, right, you stagnate, right? And if you stagnate, whether it's bringing in new talent and you're having a difficulty, so you got really kind of then self-reflect why you're having difficulty, whether it's a system-wide, like the pipeline issue, or if it's a specific person, a specific firm stagnating on technology. I mean, if you're still using a 286 computer and you're like, well, it still has Lotus 123 and I can do my spreadsheets on it, it's like, well, you're missing out on a lot. I mean, I think I remember listening to a podcast once. Double entry bookkeeping was invented in the Renaissance, right? So like fundamentally, that concept has not changed, right? It's been around since the Renaissance. It's very valuable and stable. However, how we do it has, right? And no
Mhm.
longer is it giant ledger books, sheets of paper everywhere, parchments that we're pulling off, or even just, in the 70s when VisiCalc, the first spreadsheet software, came out. Like, we don't use that anymore. We use Excel. We have Power BI reports. We have tools like Dry Run, stuff like that, where those are the technologies that we use to become more productive. We always got to be careful. I always like to joke, sometimes we're more productive to do we add efficiency so we can do more work, right? So, like, always be careful that when you are adding efficiencies and all that stuff, you are bringing value, but always just make sure you balance it out. Don't just like, great, now I can take on 500 more clients, and then
Yeah.
you're worse off, and then you're like, well, I got more money but I have less time. So
Yeah.
there's the self help piece of it, right?
Yeah, exactly. So if there's like a CPA listening right now, or an organization, and they're thinking, yeah, okay, I want to explore a little bit of this. I want to see. I know we're wasting some time on some things. What's the sort of first step? What would they do to get talk with you and sort of take those first steps and just explore and see if it might be a fit for them?
So usually the first thing a lot of people do is just book a discovery call using my Calendly on my website. A lot of times also people will download, again, it's just a worksheet that's on my website for creating automation ideas. Some of the best times to do it is during tax season, to have that sheet available, put it on a shared drive, tell all your staff about it. All your staff, as they get ideas, they can go in, they can write down the idea, score it real quick, close it, done. And then by the end of tax season, maybe you have like 15 ideas already, right? And that's a lot of automation that you can build out, that sort of thing. But usually we do a discovery call, then we go over some ideas, some concepts, and what can and can't be done. Um, the value of automation and all that other stuff. And then usually we try to see, like, okay, we also look at tech stack to see if it's a good fit. Again, like I mentioned, sometimes I say I can't help you because you are too enmeshed with a provider where they have control of everything on your system. And if we, as an automation provider, can't have some control, and we obviously, as an automation provider, we're usually accessing like APIs and admin panels and stuff like that. So, we have keys to the kingdom, so to speak, right? And, rightfully, for businesses want to be careful with that. But, again, if you're in these hosted environments where you can't do anything except use the software the way they intended. A big thing is you got to migrate away from those onto a platform that's either 100% web-based SaaS, or at least the data itself is stored in such a way where it's accessible via APIs or RPA or anything like that. Like, if there's no APIs it's a web-based SaaS product, but at least we can then do RPAs, stuff like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Wesley. This was really, really interesting. I'll make sure that I have your website down in the show notes, your LinkedIn profile. Can you also just mention the website right here so people can look you up?
Absolutely. So my website is automatapracdev.com. We're in the middle where we're going to be rebuilding it a bunch because we're actually going to be opening up an online shop with what we call mini automations. We can automate A through Z, but maybe sometimes we're like, hey, we can take part M of an A through Z process and kind of package it down into a standalone executable software that is it's just a purchase, right? Like, it's not SaaS, it's not a per tax return or per user. It's just you pay one fee, you can use as much as you want, things like that, because we're trying to build out some of those. But yeah, you can find our website, check us out, see a lot of the software that we've connected to and build automations for. We got a bullet point list there. If you see a few in there that are in your wheelhouse, on your tech stack, you should definitely look us up so we can chat.
Oh, terrific. Well, thank you so much, Wesley. I really enjoyed our conversation, learned a lot today. And those of you out there, if you're in a spreadsheet or your team is in a spreadsheet dealing with cash flow issues, especially if they're complicated, and you got multiple locations, multiple currencies, a bunch of different people involved, and it's just going to blow your mind, come and talk with us at dryrun.com. We can help you take control of that cash flow forecasting, cash flow management, and get you on those spreadsheets. Thanks again, Wesley. Really appreciate it.